Picture a royal court, golden halls, whispered secrets, and the silent figures who held more sway than anyone dared to admit. These weren't the armored generals or jeweled nobility you might expect, but men who had sacrificed everything for a chance to stand in the shadows of power. Eunuchs, often dismissed as mere servants, were the hidden hands guiding empires. They shaped the fate of dynasties from Rome's marble palaces to the forbidden city's gilded corridors, their influence stretching far beyond the throne rooms they guarded. How did these men, barred from traditional paths of power, become the most trusted confidants of kings and emperors? The answer lies in a web of loyalty, cunning, and roles so vital that no ruler could afford to ignore them. Think about the last time you heard a story of ancient power. Chances are the eunuchs were left out of the tale, yet without them, history would have unfolded in ways we can barely imagine. They were the keepers of secrets, the enforcers of wills, and sometimes the puppeteers pulling the strings of empire. In Byzantium, they commanded armies. In China, they oversaw vast bureaucracies. In the Ottoman court, they mediated between the Sultan and his subjects. Their roles were as varied as they were unexpected, from treasurers of unimaginable wealth to guardians of the royal harem. But why them? What made eunuchs the go-to figures for tasks that others couldn't or wouldn't undertake? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's most fascinating yet overlooked forces. Over the next 31 revelations, you'll discover how eunuchs became the ultimate insiders in a world that often pretended they didn't exist. You'll see how they turned their unique position into unparalleled influence, navigating the deadly games of court politics with a skill few could match. This isn't just a story of power, it's a story of survival, adaptation, and the quiet revolutions that happen far from the battlefield. So settle in, because by the end of this journey, you'll never look at ancient history the same way again. The shadows are about to give up their secrets. Imagine a place where the most powerful men in the world could not set foot, a sanctuary of silk curtains and whispered intrigues, where the future of empires was shaped behind closed doors. This was the royal harem, and its guardians were eunuchs. Their very existence made them the only men who could move freely between the secluded world of royal women and the cutthroat politics of the court. In the Ottoman Empire, the chief black eunuch of the harem wasn't just a watchman, he was a gatekeeper of dynasties. He decided who could enter the Sultan's private world, which meant he controlled the flow of information, the alliances formed through marriage, and even the upbringing of future rulers. But why eunuchs? The answer lies in the brutal logic of power. Kings and emperors needed someone to protect their most vulnerable treasures, their wives, daughters, and heirs, without the risk of betrayal or personal ambition. A eunuch couldn't father a rival dynasty. He couldn't seduce a queen or plot to place his own son on the throne. That made him the ultimate safe choice. Yet, far from being passive sentinels, these men turned their limitations into leverage. In Ming Dynasty China, harem eunuchs became so influential that they could sway imperial succession, whispering advice into the ears of emperors who relied on them for untainted counsel. The harem wasn't just a gilded cage, it was a nerve center of power, and eunuchs were its conductors. They knew every secret, every rivalry between royal wives, every hidden weakness of princes. When a sultan or emperor died, it was often the harem eunuchs who ensured the smoothest possible transition, handpicking the next ruler from among the eligible heirs. Their role went far beyond standing guard. They were the invisible architects of dynasties, proving that sometimes the most powerful figures in history were the ones society pretended not to see. While the harem showcased eunuchs as guardians of royal privacy, their true political mastery unfolded in the corridors of administration. Picture the Byzantine palace at Constantinople, a labyrinth of ministries, treasuries, and reception halls where a single figure held the empire's purse strings and private correspondence. The Prepositus Sacri Cubiculi, or Grand Chamberlain, was no ordinary bureaucrat. As the emperor's right hand, this eunuch managed everything from foreign diplomats' audiences to the payroll of the imperial army. His influence was so vast that 6th century historian Procopius described one such chamberlain, Narses, as the man who truly knows where the bodies are buried, both figuratively and, some whispered, literally. What made eunuchs uniquely suited for these roles? Unlike noble families jockeying to install their sons as successors, a eunuch's power ended with his life. Emperors slept easier knowing their chief administrator wouldn't scheme to crown a nephew or grandson. This perceived neutrality allowed eunuchs like China's Ming Dynasty Directorate of Ceremonial Heads to oversee colossal budgets and personnel appointments while avoiding the suspicions that dogged other officials. In Persia, Sassanid kings entrusted eunuchs with tax collection, a perilous job that required someone immune to bribes or familial blackmail. Yet to call them mere functionaries would miss their brilliance. Byzantine eunuch administrators like Eutropius didn't just file reports, they engineered entire systems. When Emperor Arcadius struggled with grain shortages, it was his eunuch chamberlain who redesigned Constantinople's supply chains, diverting Egyptian harvests through a network of fortified warehouses. Similarly, Tang Dynasty China's eunuch-run Bureau of Palace Affairs didn't simply maintain buildings. They orchestrated the celestial harmony of the Forbidden City, ensuring every ritual and reception reinforced the emperor's divine mandate. Their administrative legacy reveals a paradox. By being excluded from traditional power structures, eunuchs became their ultimate operators. While generals fought border wars and nobles plotted marriages, the eunuchs kept the lights on, balancing ledgers, smoothing diplomatic crises, and remembering where every skeleton lay hidden. When the Ottoman Empire's treasury faced collapse in the 16th century, it wasn't the Grand Vizier who restored order, but the chief eunuch of the privy purse, who reorganized tax districts with mathematical precision. These weren't clerks pushing papers, they were the unseen architects whose administrative genius allowed empires to flourish or crumble based on their calculations. When empires needed to speak to one another without the baggage of family ties or territorial ambitions, they turned to eunuchs, the ultimate neutral parties in a world of shifting alliances. Consider Zheng He, the Ming Dynasty's legendary eunuch admiral, whose 7 voyages across the Indian Ocean weren't just about showcasing China's naval might. They were masterclasses in diplomacy, with Zheng He negotiating trade agreements, mediating disputes between foreign rulers, and even returning exiled kings to their thrones, all while flying the dragon banner of the Yongle Emperor. What made a eunuch the perfect choice for such delicate missions? Unlike noble ambassadors who might secretly scheme to enrich their own estates or marry into foreign dynasties, a eunuch's loyalty was unquestioned precisely because he had no descendants to favor or hereditary lands to protect. This unique credibility allowed eunuchs to operate where others faltered. In 15th century Southeast Asia, Zheng He's fleet faced a volatile power struggle in Sumatra. Where a traditional envoy might have been accused of taking sides, the eunuch admiral brokered peace by leveraging his reputation as a disinterested mediator, a living symbol of imperial impartiality. Similar scenes played out in Byzantine courts, where eunuch diplomats like the 7th century Paulus were sent to negotiate with Persia precisely because they couldn't be swayed by offers of marriage alliances or threats to family holdings. Their very bodies were passports to trust. A eunuch's presence signaled that an offer or a warning came straight from the throne, untainted by personal agenda. But eunuch diplomacy wasn't just about avoiding conflicts of interest, it was about mastering the theater of power. When the Ottoman Sultan Selim the Grim needed to intimidate Venice without declaring war, he dispatched his chief white eunuch with a caravan of jeweled gifts and an army of silent janissaries lining the route. The message was clear: this was no ordinary trade discussion. In Mughal India, eunuch envoys like Itamad Khan didn't just deliver letters between emperors, they orchestrated entire spectacles, arranging elephant processions and fireworks displays that turned simple message deliveries into shows of imperial grandeur. Their understanding of ceremonial nuance made them indispensable. They knew exactly how a raised eyebrow during a toast or a strategically delayed gift exchange could alter the course of negotiations. Perhaps their most underestimated weapon was cultural fluency. Unlike provincial governors who viewed foreign customs with suspicion, eunuchs, often raised in diverse palace environments, excelled at code switching. Zhenghi's crews included Muslim prayer leaders for Arab ports and Buddhist translators for Sri Lankan temples. Byzantine eunuch diplomats fluent in Persian could quote Zoroastrian proverbs during treaty discussions. This adaptability made them the original globalists, threading together empires that saw one another as alien civilizations. Their legacy endures in modern diplomacy's unspoken rules: the value of neutral intermediaries, the power of symbolic gestures, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the most influential negotiators are those with nothing to gain and everything to lose by failure. On the blood-soaked battlefields of 6th century Italy, a silver-haired commander in his 70s surveyed the chaos not with the rage of a warrior, but the calm precision of a chess master. This was Narses, the Byzantine eunuch who would outmaneuver the fearsome Ostrogoth king Totila at the Battle of Tajani, proving once and for all that military genius had nothing to do with physical prowess. While popular imagination paints eunuchs as delicate courtiers, history reveals a startling truth. Some of antiquity's most brilliant strategists were men who'd been ritually excluded from traditional notions of masculinity. What made eunuchs like Narses such effective military leaders? The answer lies in their unique position within imperial power structures. Unlike aristocratic generals who might dream of seizing the throne for their dynasties, a eunuch commander's legacy ended with his own life. Emperor Justinian could sleep soundly knowing Narses had no sons or nephews to install as rivals. His loyalty was absolute because he had no bloodline to advance. This same logic made eunuch generals indispensable to Chinese emperors facing peasant revolts. The Ming dynasty's Zheng, he didn't just sail oceans, he crushed pirate fleets and put down rebellions with terrifying efficiency. Their battlefield successes shattered stereotypes about physical limitations. When Narses faced the Ostrogoths, he didn't rely on brute strength, he used psychological warfare, positioning his forces to play on the enemy's cultural obsession with frontal assaults. Similarly, Byzantine eunuch General Solomon routed Berber tribes in North Africa not through hand-to-hand combat, but by mastering desert logistics, ensuring his troops had water while enemies withered under the sun. These weren't flukes, they were demonstrations of how eunuchs transformed perceived weaknesses into strategic advantages. Without personal glory to chase, they focused solely on victory's mathematical components: supply lines, terrain analysis, and the precise timing of cavalry charges. The Ottomans institutionalized this wisdom, creating entire corps of eunuch military governors. In 17th century Hungary, the eunuch Pasha Kara Mustafa organized Europe's most sophisticated siege at Vienna, coordinating miners, artillery, and even battlefield psychologists to break enemy morale. His failure came not from lack of skill, but from political interference, a reminder that even the most brilliant eunuch commanders still answered to fallible rulers. Perhaps the ultimate testament to their military legacy lies in how enemies feared them. Persian chronicles describe Byzantine eunuch generals as ghost commanders, men who fought without the reckless passions that doomed normal warriors. Chinese rebels reportedly fled at the sight of eunuch-led divine cannon regiments, their discipline more terrifying than any weapon. These battlefield eunuchs didn't just win wars, they rewrote the rules of engagement, proving that true power flows not from physicality, but from the unshakable focus of those with nothing left to lose. Behind every glittering throne lay a more powerful engine, the empire's treasury, where gold and grain dictated the fate of nations. And who better to guard these lifelines than men who could never pass wealth to heirs? From Persia's vaulted treasure houses to China's silk-lined counting rooms, eunuchs became the unseen accountants of history, wielding abacuses like weapons and turning ledger entries into instruments of control. The Sassanid kings of Persia entrusted their entire tax system to eunuch overseers, men who could travel through rebellious provinces without fear of being swayed by local dynastic loyalties. A provincial governor might bribe a traditional tax collector with promises of marrying his daughter, but what could he offer a eunuch? This brutal calculus made them the ultimate fiscal enforcers. Yet their financial roles went far beyond mere collection. Byzantine eunuch treasurers like Philagrius didn't just count coins, they engineered entire economies. When Emperor Justinian needed to fund his wars and building projects, it was his eunuch ministers who devised the first known system of deficit spending, temporarily borrowing from church coffers with meticulously calculated repayment schedules. In Tang Dynasty China, eunuch-run state monopolies on salt and iron weren't just revenue streams, they were levers of geopolitical power. By controlling these essentials, eunuch administrators could starve rebellious regions of resources or flood loyal areas with subsidized goods, all without drawing a single sword. The irony, some of history's most notorious corrupt officials were also eunuchs. Ming China's Wang Zhen didn't just manage the imperial treasury, he plundered it, amassing a private art collection that rivaled the emperor's own. His secret, mastering the gap between perception and reality. While emperors believed eunuchs were immune to greed because they lacked heirs, men like Wang Zhen found other uses for wealth-building lavish temples to ensure their spiritual legacy or patronizing artists to craft immortality through culture. This duality reveals the true complexity of their economic roles. They were both the empire's financial safeguards and its most ingenious loophole exploiters. Their financial legacy endures in modern systems. The Ottomans' eunuch-controlled Vakif charitable foundations became blueprints for today's trust funds, with intricate rules for wealth preservation that still influence Islamic finance. Byzantine eunuch tax codes introduced concepts like progressive taxation based on land quality, ideas echoed in contemporary policy. Perhaps their greatest lesson was that true economic power lies not in brute force, but in the quiet authority of those who control the ledgers. When the Abbasid Caliphate collapsed under debt, it wasn't invading armies that broke the empire. It was the eunuch treasurers who defected, taking their institutional knowledge with them. In the end, the penna or the abacus proved mightier than the sword. In the quiet hours before dawn, while palace courtyards still lay empty, a unique classroom came to life, one where future rulers learned the delicate art of power from teachers who could never wear the crown themselves. Across empires, from the marble halls of Constantinople to the perfumed gardens of Delhi, eunuchs became the shadow architects of royal education, molding young princes into the rulers they would one day become. Take the Mughal Empire's Itimat ad-Dawla, a eunuch whose influence stretched far beyond the classroom. He didn't just teach young Shah Jahan mathematics and calligraphy, he schooled him in the unspoken rules of courtly survival, the subtle dance of alliances, and the perilous balance between mercy and authority. What made eunuchs such effective royal tutors? Unlike ambitious noble tutors who might secretly push a prince toward policies benefiting their own families, a eunuch educator's loyalty was singular to the throne itself. In Byzantium, eunuch mentors like Constantine the Paphlagonian drilled imperial heirs in theology and statecraft while subtly reinforcing the sacred nature of their future role. Their lessons weren't found in textbooks, they were woven into folktales about past emperors' triumphs and failures, turning history into a living blueprint for power. But their influence went deeper than academics. These were the men who taught princes how to listen at keyholes without being caught, a vital skill in palaces where unguarded words meant disaster. Ottoman princes learned from their eunuch mentors how to read the slight tremble in a vizier's voice or the calculated pause before a rival's answer. Chinese imperial heirs were schooled in the art of calligraphy not just for beauty, but because each brushstroke revealed character, a lesson from eunuch tutors who had spent lifetimes decoding hidden meanings in every gesture at court. The most brilliant royal educators understood that knowledge alone couldn't protect a future ruler. Ming Dynasty eunuch Wang Zhen famously taught the young Zhengtong emperor chess not to improve his strategy, but to break his habit of reckless moves, a lesson that tragically went unheeded when the adult emperor led his army into a disastrous ambush at Tumu Fortress. Conversely, Safavid Persia's eunuch tutors emphasized poetry and Sufi philosophy, creating shahs like Ismail Roman II, who could quote Rumi while outmaneuvering rivals twice their age. Perhaps their greatest legacy lay in teaching restraint, where noble tutors might encourage a prince's arrogance or thirst for glory. Eunuch mentors like Delhi's Malik Kafur reminded their charges that true power often lay in patience, in knowing when to withhold a decree or delay a punishment for maximum effect. Their own lives were living lessons in the cost of impulsiveness. Many bore the physical reminders of palace intrigues gone wrong. When the Kangxi emperor credited his eunuch tutor son Wenquan with teaching him the weight of the dragon robe, he spoke not of its literal heaviness, but of the burdens no outsider could ever fully comprehend. These educators shaped more than individual rulers, they designed the very template of imperial rule across continents. The Byzantine prince raised by a eunuch learned to distrust aristocratic factions, just as the Mughal heir absorbed warnings about provincial governors' ambitions. Through stories, parables, and carefully curated, accidental eavesdropping, eunuch tutors built mental fortresses in their pupils' defenses that would later determine whether an empire flourished or fractured. Their classrooms had no walls, their lessons no formal syllabus, yet their influence echoes through history in the edicts and decisions of the rulers they crafted from childhood. The gongs echoed through the Forbidden City at precisely the third hour of the dragon, a sound so perfectly timed it seemed to bend the heavens themselves. This split-second precision wasn't celestial magic. It was the work of eunuch ceremonials, men who had spent decades memorizing the exact millisecond each ritual object should move during imperial rites. In a world where the emperor's divinity hinged on flawless performances, these masters of ceremony didn't just organize events, they choreographed reality itself. Every bow depth, every incense offering angle, even the spacing between guards during processions was calculated to reinforce one unshakable truth. The ruler wasn't merely a man, but the living pivot between earth and sky. What made eunuchs uniquely suited for these sacred theatricals? Their entire existence was a study in precision. Castrated before puberty, they'd been trained since childhood in the minutiae of body language and symbolic gesture. When a Ming Dynasty eunuch placed the emperor's seal on a document, his hands moved with the same measured grace whether it was a routine edict or a death warrant. This consistency became the empire's heartbeat, a rhythm so reliable that subjects could set their calendars by it. Byzantine coronation eunuchs took this further, engineering ceremonies where the new ruler appeared to physically grow taller during the crowning, using hidden platforms and lighting tricks to create the illusion of divine transformation. But their genius lay in adapting tradition to crisis. When the Kangxi emperor ascended China's throne as a child, eunuch ritualists redesigned the enthronement ceremony overnight. They replaced the usual martial displays with scholars' games, subtly signaling that this reign would prioritize wisdom over brute force. Similarly, Ottoman eunuchs transformed the Sultan's Friday procession into a mobile propaganda tool during rebellions, routing the parade past restless neighborhoods where the sight of imperial regalia could quell unrest without a single drawn sword. These weren't just symbolic flourishes, they were psychological operations conducted with incense burners and silk banners instead of siege engines. The most powerful ceremonies were those the public never saw. In Persia's fire temples, Zoroastrian eunuch priests performed the divine selection ritual behind closed doors, emerging with heaven-chosen successors whose legitimacy no noble dared question. Mughal harem eunuchs staged private coming-of-age rites for princes, using shadow puppetry to recount ancestral victories while planting subconscious lessons about loyalty and betrayal. Even failures became teaching tools. Byzantine eunuchs would deliberately botch minor rituals during imperial audiences, letting foreign ambassadors witness the terrifying consequences of a single misstep in this sacred dance of power. Their legacy lives on in modern statecraft's unspoken rules. The exact timing of a leader's walk down a red carpet, the strategic placement of flags behind a podium, even the calculated delay before a handshake, all descend from the eunuch's playbook. When British coronation planners studied ancient protocols for Queen Elizabeth's ceremony, they unknowingly adopted Ming Dynasty eunuch innovations about procession spacing. Today's political image consultants are just rediscovering what these ancient masters knew. That power isn't taken, it's performed, and the finest performances leave no fingerprints. The rustle of silk curtains, the barely audible click of a sliding door, these were the sounds that signaled a eunuch spy at work. In the dim lamplight of palace corridors, these masters of discretion turned every casual conversation into potential intelligence. The Byzantine Emperor Justinian knew this better than most. His chamberlain Euphrasia didn't just manage palace affairs, he ran an intricate web of informants that stretched from Persian border forts to Egyptian monasteries. Servants, merchants, even visiting ambassadors never suspected the quiet eunuch pouring wine was cataloging their every word. What made them such effective spies? Their invisibility was their armor. While nobles drew attention with lavish dress and loud opinions, eunuchs blended into the background like pieces of furniture, free to observe the unguarded moments when secrets slipped. Their access was unparalleled. As the only men permitted to move between the imperial harem, treasury, and war councils, eunuchs became walking repositories of state secrets. In Tang Dynasty China, the eunuch-run palace surveillance bureau didn't just monitor courtiers, they orchestrated elaborate honey traps, using beautiful concubines to extract information from loose-lipped officials during banquets. The Ottomans took this further, training deaf-mute eunuchs as perfect couriers. Unable to speak or hear, they memorized messages verbatim through hand signs, making them immune to interrogation. But their true brilliance lay in psychological manipulation. Byzantine eunuch spies like Narses didn't just collect information, they weaponized misinformation. Before critical battles, they'd let secret plans fall into enemy hands, only for adversaries to discover too late that the maps were false and the troop numbers fabricated. Ming Dynasty eunuchs perfected the art of the strategic leak, using carefully placed rumors to flush out traitors or destabilize rival factions without direct confrontation. The most successful operations exploited cultural blind spots. When Abbasid caliphs sent eunuch envoys to negotiate with Frankish kings, the Europeans dismissed these half-men as harmless, failing to recognize how their detailed reports on castle layouts and family rivalries would later enable Islamic conquests in Sicily. Similarly, Mughal eunuch spies posing as humble musicians mapped every weak point in Rajput fortresses during performances, their detailed intelligence enabling Akbar's eventual victories. Their legacy reshaped espionage forever. Modern surveillance tradecraft, dead drops, sleeper agents, even the concept of need-to-know compartmentalization, all trace back to eunuch spy networks. The Vatican's infamous black nobility families descended from papal eunuch spies who married into aristocracy. Even today's corporate intelligence tactics mirror their methods. The quiet intern who remembers everything, the janitor who notices which documents get shredded. Eunuchs proved that real power isn't about who holds the sword, but who controls the flow of information, and sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are those everyone forgets to watch. Beneath the gold-leafed ceilings of imperial palaces, where power was measured in whispers and alliances, an unexpected group of visionaries quietly reshaped the cultural destiny of empires. Eunuch art patrons like Tang Dynasty's Gao Lishi didn't just collect beautiful objects, they engineered entire artistic movements that would define their eras. Picture this, a man barred from fathering children, pouring his legacy into ink and parchment instead, commissioning poets like Lai Bai to compose verses that would echo through millennia. Gao's salon wasn't merely a gathering of artists, it was a calculated act of statecraft, where brushstrokes became propaganda, and every landscape scroll subtly reinforced the emperor's mandate from heaven. What drove eunuchs to become such influential cultural custodians? Unlike noble patrons who sought to glorify their family lineages, eunuchs like Byzantium's Chrysaphius invested in art as a form of immortality. With no descendants to carry their names, they turned to monumental architecture and religious mosaics, ensuring their presence would outlast their bodies. The Ottoman's chief black eunuch named Agha took this further, transforming Istanbul's skyline with libraries and fountains, each bearing inscriptions that cleverly credited the Sultan while discreetly including his own name in the dedications. Their artistic choices often carried hidden political messages. When Ming Dynasty eunuch Wang Zhen commissioned Buddhist temple murals depicting wrathful deities trampling demons, contemporaries recognized the unspoken warning to corrupt officials. Similarly, Byzantine eunuch courtiers popularized ivory diptychs showing emperors towering over barbarian kings, portable propaganda distributed to foreign envoys. Even their personal collections served strategic purposes. The Safavid eunuch Alavadi Khan's famed ceramic workshop didn't just produce exquisite tiles, it trained artisans whose techniques would later adorn the shrines of rival empires, spreading Persian cultural influence through beauty rather than blades. Perhaps their most enduring legacy was as talent scouts for history. The Mughal eunuch Adam Khan's patronage of young painter Basawan launched the iconic Akbari style that fused Persian precision with Indian vibrancy. In Constantinople, eunuch-sponsored scribe schools preserved classical texts through the Dark Ages by perfecting the compact, minuscule script that allowed more words per precious parchment. These weren't vanity projects, they were cultural seed banks, ensuring that even as dynasties fell, their aesthetic DNA would survive in the pattern of a carpet or the curve of a calligraphed proverb. The sheer scale of their influence shatters stereotypes. While warriors built empires with swords, eunuchs cemented them with symbolism. Every turquoise tile in Samarkand's Registan, every delicate lotus motif in Forbidden City porcelain, every gold-threaded Ottoman kaftan carried their invisible fingerprints. They proved that true power isn't just about controlling territory, it's about shaping how people see the world, one exquisite object at a time. When we admire a Tang dynasty poem or a Byzantine mosaic today, we're not just seeing art, we're witnessing the quiet triumph of men who turned their exclusion into creative superpower, crafting legacies that outshone mere bloodlines. When dawn broke over Jerusalem's temple complex, one figure moved freely between the sacred inner courts and the king's palace, a eunuch bearing messages too delicate for ordinary messengers. This wasn't just logistics, it was theology in motion. Across civilizations, eunuchs became the chosen conduits between mortal rulers and the divine precisely because their bodies were seen as ritually purified vessels. The Ethiopian eunuch from the Book of Acts wasn't merely a chariot-riding bureaucrat. His very presence symbolized the meeting point of earthly and heavenly authority, trusted with the Queen of Kandak's gold and later, the Apostle Philip's transformative teachings. Their spiritual roles defied simple categorization. In Persia's Zoroastrian temples, eunuch priests handled the eternal flames not despite their condition, but because of it. Their inability to pollute the sacred fire with potential offspring made them the only ones worthy of tending what was considered Ahura Mazda's earthly manifestation. Similarly, Byzantine emperors dispatched eunuch chamberlains to mediate theological disputes, knowing these men carried no familial alliances that could color their interpretation of divine will. When the Fourth Crusade teetered on disaster, it was a eunuch envoy who shuttled between Latin bishops and Orthodox patriarchs, his neutrality the only thread preventing total schism. This sacred trust extended to the physical realm of relics and ritual objects. Ming Dynasty eunuchs alone were permitted to carry the emperor's personal prayers to the Temple of Heaven, their hands deemed clean enough to handle the silk scrolls destined for the gods. In Mughal India, Akbar's eunuch attendants prepared his ceremonial jade seal using water from the Ganges, a task requiring ritual purity that even Brahmins couldn't guarantee amidst court intrigues. Their bodies became living reliquaries. The Sassanid king Khosrow Roman II kept a eunuch solely to safeguard a fragment of the true cross, believing his keeper's altered state created a buffer against spiritual contamination. The most fascinating cases reveal how eunuchs shaped religious policy. The Tang dynasty's eunuch Gao Lishi didn't just arrange Emperor Xuanzong's meetings with Buddhist monks. He orchestrated the syncretism of Confucian statecraft with Chan Buddhist principles, creating a governing philosophy that lasted centuries. Likewise, Ottoman chief harem eunuchs often determined which Sufi orders gained access to the Sultan, quietly influencing imperial spirituality. Their legacy lingers in unexpected places. The Vatican's Sistine Chapel choir tradition of castrati singers descended from Byzantine eunuch choirmasters who believed their voices best channeled angelic harmonies. What these intermediaries understood and what rulers relied upon was the alchemy of perceived neutrality. When the Kangxi emperor needed to reconcile warring Jesuit and Dominican factions in 17th century Beijing, he turned to his eunuch astronomers. Their mastery of celestial mathematics gave them credibility with both missionaries and mandarins, while their physical state assured all parties that no secret conversion agenda lurked beneath their silk robes. In an age where religion and politics were inseparable, eunuchs became the living parchment upon which empires wrote their spiritual compromises. Men, who moved through sacred spaces as comfortably as council chambers, their very existence a bridge between the divine and the desperately human. The blueprint for imperial power wasn't just written in laws or battles. It was etched into stone and mortar by the hands of eunuch architects. Picture the Forbidden City's crimson walls rising under the watchful eye of Ming Dynasty eunuch Yuan An, whose teams moved mountains literally to haul marble from quarries hundreds of miles away. While emperors took credit for these monumental achievements, it was often eunuchs who solved the impossible equations of logistics, labor, and symbolism that brought these structures to life. Their genius lay in understanding that every column's curve and courtyard's alignment wasn't just architecture, it was propaganda in 3 dimensions. What made eunuchs the ideal overseers of such projects? Their entire existence was an exercise in precision and discretion. Byzantine eunuch Anthemius, architect of Hagia Sophia, didn't just calculate dome stresses. He engineered a space where light seemed to pour directly from heaven onto the emperor's throne. His revolutionary pendentive design wasn't merely structural innovation. It was theological theater, making Justinian's claim to divine authority physically undeniable. Similarly, Ottoman chief black eunuch named Agha Sultan Ahmed Mosque didn't just need to hold worshippers. Its 6 minarets had to subtly outshine Mecca's without provoking outrage, a diplomatic tightrope walked through architectural nuance. Their construction sites became microcosms of empire. When Tang Dynasty eunuch Yukaon rebuilt Loyang after rebellion, he didn't just restore buildings. He redesigned the city's entire flow to prevent future uprisings, widening streets for cavalry patrols and positioning watchtowers at precise intervals. Safavid eunuch architects in Isfahan went further, engineering the Maiden Square's acoustics so a whisper at the Shah's balcony could reach the farthest merchant's ear, a visceral demonstration of royal omniscience. These were men who thought in centuries, not fiscal years. Mughal eunuch Adam Khan's water channels at Fatehpur Sikri still function flawlessly after 400 monsoons, their gradient calculations exact to the millimeter. The true test of their skill came during crises. When an earthquake toppled Constantinople's walls in 747, eunuch engineers didn't just rebuild, they reinvented, creating triple-layered defenses that withstood sieges for 500 years. Ming eunuch Zheng, his shipyards near Nanjing could launch 9 masted treasure ships in weeks by standardizing parts like an ancient assembly line. Their logistical brilliance often bordered on magic. Byzantine accounts describe eunuch builders floating 50-ton columns up the Bosporus on rafts during storms, timing the waves like conductors orchestrating a symphony. Their legacy reshapes how we see history's grandest structures. The precise alignment of Beijing's Temple of Heaven with the winter solstice sunrise. A eunuch astronomer's calculation, the hidden drainage systems beneath Versailles gardens that Louis Roman XIV engineers copied, inspired by Ottoman eunuch hydraulics. Even failures carried lessons when the leaning tower of Ghaznai's minaret began sinking. Its eunuch architect deliberately angled it toward Mecca, transforming an engineering flaw into a devotional gesture. These men didn't just build walls and walkways, they encoded imperial ideology into every brick, proving that the most enduring power often comes not from the sword but from the trowel. In the shadowy alcoves of palace infirmaries, where even the most powerful rulers faced their most vulnerable moments, eunuch physicians wielded a unique authority, the power to heal those who commanded empires. These weren't just herbalists grinding roots in back rooms. They were elite medical practitioners whose expertise rivaled and often surpassed that of university-trained doctors. Take the Tang Dynasty's eunuch physician Lai Zun, whose Materia Medica became the definitive medical text for 3 centuries. while court records celebrated his skill in treating the emperor's migraines with precise acupuncture, his real genius lay in pharmacology. He developed the first known standardized dosages for mercury-based remedies, carefully calibrating them to treat syphilis without poisoning the patient, a delicate balance Western medicine wouldn't master for another 800 years. What set eunuch healers apart was their unprecedented access. In Ottoman harems, where even the Sultan's own brothers couldn't enter, eunuch physicians like Hayatazade Mustafa Fevzi moved freely, diagnosing fevers and delivering babies with a discretion that saved countless royal lives. Their medical role was as much about psychology as physiology. Byzantine eunuch doctors treating emperors, melancholic humors, prescribed not just herbs, but carefully curated music therapy-specific modes played on the lyre to stabilize moods. When Safavid princesses suffered hysterical suffocation, likely panic attacks, their eunuch healers administered rosewater inhalants while strategically adjusting palace ventilation, understanding that environment shaped recovery as much as medicine. Their most controversial and revolutionary work involved reproductive health. Eunuch gynecologists in Ming China developed early cesarean techniques using silk sutures sterilized in rice wine, while their Mughal counterparts perfected herbal contraceptives for royal concubines. This knowledge came at a price. Persian court documents reveal eunuch doctors being executed for merely knowing too much about a queen's miscarriage. Yet their very expendability made them perfect for high-risk procedures. When Byzantine Emperor Constantine Roman IX fell ill with what historians now suspect was testicular cancer, it was his eunuch physician who could perform the intimate examination without political repercussions, a privilege no intact male doctor would dare claim. Beyond palace walls, their innovations changed public health. Ottoman chief white eunuch Hekambashi's plague prevention protocols, quarantines, vinegar-soaked masks, and the isolation of infected clothing became models for Europe's first public health boards. In Baghdad, the Abbasid caliph's eunuch doctors ran free clinics where they pioneered trauma surgery techniques later adopted by Crusader physicians. Their legacy lingers in surprising places. The modern "Do Not Disturb" sign descends from the jade tablets Ming eunuch healers hung outside royal sick rooms, ensuring absolute quiet for recovery. Perhaps their greatest contribution was normalizing mental health care. While medieval Europe burned melancholics as witches, Mughal eunuch physicians prescribed meditation gardens and storytelling therapies for depression. Their understanding that illness didn't discriminate between king and servant, and that healing required both science and humanity, made them the unsung pioneers of holistic medicine. When a delirious Suleiman the Magnificent raved about jinns attacking him, it wasn't imams but his eunuch doctor who calmly prescribed poppy extract laced with saffron, recognizing a fever's hallucination rather than demonic possession. In a world quick to blame the supernatural, these men stood as quiet champions of reason, their scalpels and mortar pestles proving more transformative than any courtier's sword. The clink of silver chopsticks against porcelain might seem like an ordinary sound until you realize it's the prelude to a life or death ritual. For Imperial food taster eunuchs, every bite they took could be their last, a sacrificial act woven into the fabric of palace routine. In Byzantium's Great Palace, a eunuch known only as the taster in court records sampled each dish 3 times. Once when ingredients entered the kitchens, again during preparation, and finally at the emperor's table, his body a living filter against poison. The stakes were horrifyingly real. Sassanid Persian archives describe a eunuch collapsing mid-meal after detecting arsenic-laced lamb, his convulsions saving King Khosrow's life while etching a warning into royal memory. But their culinary role went far beyond mere poison checks. Ming Dynasty eunuchs like Liu Jin transformed banquets into geopolitical chessboards, where the placement of a shark fin soup bowl or the omission of a guest's favorite spice could signal favor or disgrace. At Timur's Samarkand court, eunuch stewards used food as psychological warfare, serving captured enemies dishes from their homelands in portions too small to satisfy, a cruel reminder of what they'd lost. The Ottomans elevated this to high art. Chief Harem eunuch Sümbül Agha's signature pomegranate molasses glaze on roasted quail became a status symbol, appearing only at meals where the Sultan wished to impress or intimidate foreign dignitaries. Their mastery of flavors concealed brilliant strategy. Byzantine eunuch cooks slipped mild laxatives into rebellious nobles' portions before important meetings, leaving them physically uncomfortable during negotiations. Mughal palace records reveal eunuchs adjusting the emperor's diet based on astrological charts, serving cooling yogurt dishes during Mars, ruled weeks to temper Aurangzeb's notorious temper. Even food storage became an intelligence game. Tang dynasty eunuchs kept two separate ice houses, one with real winter ice for the emperor, another with fake snow made of crushed salt for visiting tributaries, reinforcing China's myth of limitless resources. The most ingenious culinary eunuchs turned meals into living archives. When Abbasid Caliph Al-Ma'mun demanded a recreation of his great-grandfather's victory feast, it was his elderly eunuch chef who recalled not just recipes, but the exact order dishes had been served 80 years prior, knowledge that helped legitimize the new ruler's dynastic claims. Similarly, Safavid eunuch bakers guarded starter dough passed down through generations, its microbial culture considered as precious as crown jewels. Their kitchens were laboratories of soft power, the infamous thousand-layer cakes served by King Dynasty eunuchs to Mongol chieftains weren't just delicious, their intricate folding techniques subtly demonstrated Chinese cultural superiority. This deadly gastronomy left fingerprints on modern dining. The Japanese kaiseki tradition of serving dishes in precise sequences, adapted from Heian period eunuch protocols for imperial toxin testing. The concept of tasting menus at high-end restaurants, a direct descendant of Ottoman eunuch buffets where every dish had to be sampled by staff before reaching noble hands. Even the humble restaurant Sneeze Guard traces back to Ming Dynasty, eunuch-designed lacquer screens that shielded the emperor's meals from airborne contaminants. Their legacy proves that throughout history, the most consequential battles weren't always fought with swords. Sometimes they were waged with spoons. In the silent pre-dawn hours of the Forbidden City, when even the emperor still slept, one man sat awake beside a locked lacquer box, its contents more powerful than any army. This was Lai Liaoning, the Qing dynasty's chief eunuch, whose delicate fingers held the empire's ultimate bureaucratic weapon, the imperial seal. That carved jade rectangle wasn't just a stamp. It was the magical key transforming paper into law, its absence rendering even the most eloquent edicts meaningless. When Lai pressed the seal into vermilion paste and onto a decree, he wasn't just completing a formality, he was breathing life into the emperor's will, making him the unseen midwife of history's turning points. Controlling the seal meant controlling reality itself. In 844, Tang Dynasty eunuch Tian Lingzi famously delayed stamping military orders during a peasant revolt, buying critical days for imperial reinforcements to arrive. His forgetfulness wasn't negligence, it was strategic calculus, proving how eunuch seal keepers could throttle the flow of power like a spigot. Ottoman palace records reveal an even subtler game. Chief white eunuchs would vary the pressure of the Tugra stamp, making some decrees appear hastily issued while others bore the deep, authoritative imprint signaling unshakable royal resolve. These weren't clerks, they were psychological artists manipulating perception through ink and wax. The most brilliant seal keepers turned bureaucracy into theater. Ming eunuch Wang Zhen staged elaborate losses of the seal during succession crises, forcing rival factions to negotiate through him as the only channel to legitimacy. Byzantine eunuch chamberlains took this further, creating multiple tiers of seals: gold for laws, silver for appointments, lead for death warrants, each requiring different levels of verification that only they fully understood. Their mastery of these hierarchies gave them veto power over imperial decisions without ever saying no outright. A misplaced seal case or accidentally dried ink pad could delay policies for weeks. Yet their greatest power lay in forgery prevention. Mughal eunuch seal bearers like Itibar Khan developed secret watermark techniques for imperial paper, while Sassanid Persian eunuchs mixed trace amounts of crushed lapis lazuli into wax that would crack distinctively if tampered. These weren't just security measures, they were early forms of statecraft, creating systems so flawless that when the Kangxi Emperor's seal was stolen in 1683, the thief couldn't use it. Only the palace eunuchs knew the precise angle and rotation needed to make the impression appear authentic. Their legacy shaped modern governance in ways we still feel. The concept of wet signatures versus digital approvals, a direct descendant of eunuch seal protocols. The ceremonial maces carried before parliamentary speakers, symbolic remnants of the ivory rods Byzantine eunuchs used to guard seal cases. Even today's nuclear launch codes echo the ancient truth these men embodied. That true power often resides not in the voice that gives orders, but in the hands that make them official. Beneath the flickering torchlight of Constantinople's slave markets, a figure in embroidered robes moved with chilling efficiency, not to purchase laborers, but to inspect them like livestock. This was no ordinary slaver. He was a eunuch overseer, a man who knew the precise value of human suffering because he'd once been merchandise himself. The Byzantine Empire's prepositors of the slave guilds held a macabre expertise. He could assess a captive's potential as a eunuch within seconds, judging vocal tone and bone structure to predict who might survive castration and bring the highest price. His role embodied history's cruelest irony: the enslaved who became enslavers, wielding power over others trapped in the same nightmare that had shaped him. The mechanics of this trade reveal its calculated horror. In the Abbasid Caliphate's Zanj markets, eunuch overseers operated on a brutal economy of scale. Young boys from the Eurasian steppes fetched premium prices if they could be castrated before puberty, but the procedure's mortality rate hovered near 90%. Only the most experienced eunuch slavers knew which monasteries along the Black Sea coast employed Byzantine surgical techniques that improved survival odds. These men didn't just broker lives, they curated them, separating those destined for menial labor from the rare few with the poise and intellect to serve in caliphal courts. A 9th century Baghdad ledger chillingly records Chief Eunuch Abul Fadl ibn al-Furat personally selecting 30 Slavic boys annually for special processing, creating a steady pipeline of future palace administrators. Their participation wasn't just about profit, it was about survival. When the Ming dynasty's Zhengde emperor demanded 1,000 new eunuchs within a month, the court's chief eunuch Zhang Xun didn't raid prisons as expected. Instead, he sent agents to drought-stricken villages, offering starving families silver for their sons. This wasn't kindness, it was supply chain management. By controlling recruitment, Zhang ensured the new eunuchs would owe loyalty to him rather than rival factions. Similar strategies unfolded in Ottoman Aleppo, where harem eunuchs supervised the training of African eunuchs destined for Topkapi Palace, weeding out any who showed independent thinking before they could become threats. The psychological toll of this duality surfaced in unexpected ways. Sassanid Persian records describe a eunuch slaver named Varam, who, after decades of procuring boys from the Caucasus, suddenly freed his entire stock and vanished into the mountains. Later accounts suggest he'd recognized his own childhood village among the captives. More commonly, the trade's veterans developed twisted justifications. A 15th century Venetian account quotes a eunuch trader defending his work, "Better the knife and a palace than the plow and starvation." This warped pragmatism allowed the system to perpetuate itself, with each generation of eunuchs replicating the trauma that created them. Their legacy forces uncomfortable questions about complicity and survival. When the great slave markets of Delhi were finally abolished in 1843, it wasn't British reformers who dismantled the auction blocks. It was the Mughal emperor's eunuch ministers, men who'd once profited from the trade. Perhaps they remembered the chains too well. The ledgers they left behind tell silent stories. Next to certain entries, faint charcoal marks where fingers had nervously tallied their own origins among the sold. These men straddled history's moral fault lines, proving that even the oppressed can become oppressors when the system offers no other path to power, and that freedom, when it finally comes, sometimes arrives too late to wash the blood from one's hands. The rustling of bamboo brushes against silk paper in a dimly lit palace alcove might seem like a mundane sound until you realize these strokes are quietly rewriting history. Eunuch chroniclers like Sima Qian, the grand historian of Han Dynasty China, didn't just record events, they sculpted emperors' legacies with every carefully chosen character. When Sima famously documented Emperor Wu's military excesses despite facing castration as punishment, he proved that eunuch historians wielded a unique power, the ability to shape how future generations would judge the very rulers who controlled their bodies. Their scrolls became time capsules of truth and propaganda, blending objective fact with subtle critique in ways that still challenge modern scholars. What made eunuchs uniquely suited as imperial historians? Their position offered unprecedented access to both public spectacles and private moments. Byzantine eunuch Chamberlain John the Orphanatrophos didn't just transcribe official decrees. He preserved the whispered arguments between Emperor Romanos Roman III and his generals that never made it into formal records. In the Mughal Empire, harem eunuchs like Abdul Karim recorded not just court ceremonies but the midnight anxieties of Shah Jahan as he agonized over the Taj Mahal's construction delays. These men were flies on history's wall, their ink capturing the unguarded humanity behind the ceremonial masks of power. Their writing strategies revealed genius-level social navigation. Tang Dynasty eunuch chroniclers developed a secret lexicon. Phrases like, "the emperor showed great restraint," might actually signal his drunken incapacity, while "the harvest was sufficient" could mask famine conditions. Ottoman court historian Mustafa Ali took this further, embedding criticism in seemingly flattering passages. His description of Sultan Murad Roman III, unparalleled generosity, during Ramadan feasts subtly highlighted the ruler's gluttony by listing extravagant dish quantities. These weren't mere scribes, they were cryptographic artists, leaving truth buried where only future generations might dig. The most brilliant historical manipulations occurred through omission. When Ming eunuch Feng Bao edited the veritable records after the Jiajing emperor's death, he didn't falsify events. He simply erased entire months of the ruler's alchemical obsessions, creating gaps that later historians would strain to explain. Similarly, Byzantine eunuch Theodore of Sicyan's chronicle of Emperor Heraclius' reign conspicuously lacks any mention of the ruler's nervous breakdown during the siege of Constantinople. preserving imperial dignity while leaving clues for attentive readers in his descriptions of unseasonable silences in council meetings. Their legacy reshapes how we understand historical truth. The famous Annals of Spring and Autumn tradition, where historians recorded events but withheld judgment, was largely maintained by eunuch scholars who understood that sometimes the most powerful statement is what's not said. Modern archival techniques like redaction and footnote coding descend from their methods. When you read a dry diplomatic cable or watch a press secretary's carefully worded statement today, you're witnessing the enduring influence of these master manipulators of memory men who proved that controlling the past isn't about erasing history, but about deciding which shadows get preserved for the light of tomorrow. The heavy bronze doors of the Ming tombs groaned shut behind the funeral procession, sealing away not just an emperor's remains, but the living guardians who would spend their remaining years whispering prayers to his spirit. These eunuch tomb wardens occupied a realm between the living and the dead, their vigil lasting decades in shadowed crypts where time itself seemed suspended. In China's sacred Zhongnan Mountains, the tomb complex of Emperor Wanli became home to eunuchs like Zhang Hong, who catalogued every jade burial object with ritual precision, knowing thieves would sooner pry treasures from his cold hands than bypass his watchful eyes. Theirs was a sacred geometry of protection, each guardian positioned according to ancient Feng Shui calculations, turning mausoleum corridors into spiritual fortresses. What transformed these men from palace servants to eternal sentinels? The answer lies in their unique relationship with imperial legacy. Unlike generals or ministers who might exploit a ruler's death for personal gain, eunuchs' fates were irrevocably tied to their master's posthumous reputation. When Ottoman Sultan Selim Roman II was laid to rest in Hagia Sophia's courtyard, his chief white eunuch named Ag didn't just guard the tomb. He meticulously recorded every visitor's prayerful gesture, knowing these details would determine how future generations remembered his patron's piety. In death as in life, eunuchs became the keepers of perception, their silent presence ensuring that even in eternity, emperors maintained the illusion of control. The psychological toll of this eternal watch emerges in haunting details. Excavated Tang Dynasty tomb complexes reveal small side chambers where eunuch guardians lived, their personal artifacts telling stories of isolated devotion. Chessboards with worn pieces suggesting endless games against ghosts, inkstones bearing fragments of poetry addressed to long-dead rulers. Byzantine records describe eunuch tomb priests who developed elaborate daily rituals, from polishing sarcophagi at precise solar angles to singing hymns in long-forgotten palace dialects. Their routines weren't mere tradition, they were psychological lifelines against the crushing weight of immortality's doorstep. Perhaps most fascinating were the secret systems these guardians devised. Ming eunuch Zhao diary from the Yongle Emperor's mausoleum describes a network of bronze mirrors and polished stones that allowed him to monitor multiple tomb passages simultaneously, an ancient security system rivaling modern surveillance. In Ctesiphon, Sassanid eunuch tombkeepers booby-trapped corridors with cascading sand traps, while Mughal guardians at Humayun's tomb trained parrots to shriek warnings at intruders. Their innovations reveal a deeper truth. These men weren't just preventing theft, they were preserving the delicate equilibrium between the mortal world and whatever lay beyond. The ultimate testament to their sacred role came when empires fell. As the Qing dynasty crumbled in 1911, most palace eunuchs fled, except those guarding the eastern king tombs. Decades after Puyi's abdication, elderly eunuchs like Sun Yaoting still patrolled the overgrown mausoleums, surviving on offerings from loyalists and refusing to abandon their posts even as warlords dynamited nearby crypts. Their stubborn devotion seems irrational until you realize for men whose identities were erased in life, tending these silent palaces offered the closest thing to immortality they would ever know. In the end, the tombs guarded their guardians as much as the other way around, stone walls holding space for legacies that history books would too often overlook. The sight of Zheng He's treasure ships cutting through the Indian Ocean's waves would have struck terror into any coastal kingdom, not just for their size, but for the man commanding them. Towering 9-masted junks with vermilion sails, these were floating fortresses carrying thousands of sailors, diplomats, and warriors, all answering to a eunuch admiral whose vision of maritime power dwarfed anything Europe would attempt for centuries. Zheng He's 7 epic voyages between 1405 and 1433 didn't just showcase Ming China's naval might, they rewrote the rules of exploration, proving that eunuchs could master the open seas as completely as they did palace corridors. What made eunuchs like Zheng He such effective naval commanders? Their entire existence prepared them for the complexities of long-distance voyages. Eunuchs were accustomed to living in confined, hierarchical spaces, a microcosm of shipboard life where every action required precision and cooperation. The treasure fleet's success hinged on managing diverse crews. Muslim astronomers from Arabia navigating by stars, Southeast Asian interpreters smoothing diplomatic exchanges, and Chinese craftsmen repairing ships mid-voyage with floating dry docks. Zheng He's ability to balance these factions mirrored the same skills eunuchs used to navigate court politics, just transposed onto a floating city of 15,000 men. Their maritime achievements shattered cultural assumptions. While European explorers like Columbus relied on brute force and improvisation, eunuch-led fleets operated with chilling efficiency. Ming records describe Zheng He's navigators using magnetic compasses with 24 directional bearings centuries ahead of Portuguese cartography, and carrying detailed Rutter's nautical manuals covering every monsoon pattern and coral reef from Java to Zanzibar. When Malaccan pirates attacked the fleet in 1409, Zheng He didn't just repel them, he tracked their bases across the Strait of Malacca using captured navigational charts, then systematically dismantled their network through coordinated amphibious assaults. This wasn't exploration, it was empire building by sea. The Ottomans recognized this potential, creating their own corps of eunuch naval governors. In 1517, the eunuch admiral Sinan Pasha outmaneuvered the Knights of Rhodes by disguising his galleys as Venetian traders, luring them into a deadly crossfire. His real genius lay in logistics, pre-positioning supply ships along the Anatolian coast so his fleet could strike without warning. Like Zheng He, Sinan understood that naval supremacy wasn't about battles, it was about controlling supply lines and information. His spy network stretched from Dubrovnik's docks to Alexandria's coffeehouses, proving that eunuch commanders fought wars as much with ledgers as with cannons. Perhaps their greatest legacy was cultural bridge building. Zheng He's fleet didn't just carry soldiers, it transported astronomers to calibrate calendars in Arabia, doctors to exchange medical knowledge in India, and agricultural experts to introduce Chinese rice strains to East Africa. In Sri Lanka, his diplomats mediated between warring Buddhist and Hindu kingdoms, leaving behind trilingual stone steels proclaiming peace in Chinese, Tamil, and Persian. These weren't the actions of conquerors, but of civilization's curators, men who saw oceans not as barriers, but as connective tissue binding distant cultures. The tragic irony, their very success doomed eunuch-led exploration. When Ming conservatives gained power, they burned Zheng He's nautical charts and dismantled the shipyards, fearing the cosmopolitan influences these voyages brought home. The Ottomans similarly sidelined eunuch admirals after Lepanto, preferring provincial governors with less international exposure. Yet the proof of their vision endures. Modern maritime Silk Road initiatives echo Zheng He's routes, and the Indian Ocean's trade winds still follow the same patterns his navigators mapped 600 years ago. These men didn't just command ships, they charted the currents of history itself, their compass needles pointing toward a world far larger than their detractors could imagine. In the hallowed silence of a Ming dynasty courtroom, where justice was measured in brushstrokes rather than gavels, a eunuch magistrate dipped his brush into vermilion ink, the same color that once stamped imperial decrees and prepared to rewrite a family's destiny. This wasn't mere adjudication. It was high-stakes political theater, where every ruling carried the invisible weight of imperial expectations. Eunuch judges like Huang Ming in 15th century China didn't just interpret the law, they balanced its letter against the unspoken currents of court politics, knowing a single verdict could ripple through villages and throne rooms alike. When a wealthy landowner appealed his peasant neighbor's irrigation rights, Huang's decision did more than settle a water dispute. It signaled the emperor's shifting stance on rural gentry power, turning a local squabble into a precedent that would govern similar cases for decades. Their legal authority stemmed from a paradox. Eunuchs were simultaneously insiders and outsiders to the systems they oversaw. In Byzantium's Hippodrome Tribunal, eunuch judges like Antiochus could enforce trade laws with brutal impartiality precisely because they had no merchant relatives to favor. Ottoman court records reveal Cadi judge eunuchs dismissing property cases involving powerful pashas not out of fear, but because their lack of descendants made them immune to the dynastic blackmail that compromised other officials. This perceived neutrality allowed them to become living embodiments of legal theory. When Safavid Persia's chief eunuch, Judge Mullah Ali, issued fatwas on inheritance disputes, his rulings carried extra weight precisely because he could never father heirs himself. Yet their most fascinating legal innovations emerged during crises. During the Great Plague of Constantinople in 746, eunuch magistrate Theodotus temporarily suspended debt laws, arguing that survival outweighed contract obligations, a radical concept that became the foundation of modern bankruptcy protections. Similarly, when floods devastated China's Henan province in 1494, eunuch judge Lai Xing rewrote tax codes overnight, introducing sliding-scale payments based on crop damage that later became standard disaster relief policy. These weren't just verdicts, they were legislative revolutions disguised as judicial decisions, proving that eunuch judges understood the law as a living, breathing entity rather than rigid doctrine. The darker side of their legal power surfaced in political trials. Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb's eunuch judge Bahadur Khan presided over the treason case against his own brother Dara Shikoh, engineering a guilty verdict through carefully curated witness selection rather than fabricated evidence, a nuance that made the outcome chillingly legitimate. Byzantine eunuch tribunals developed psychological interrogation techniques still used today, alternating harsh questioning with paternal concern, exploiting suspects' need for any human connection in the sterile terror of judicial proceedings. Their mastery of legal theater reached its zenith in Ottoman silent trials, where deaf-mute eunuch court scribes recorded testimony, forcing accusers to submit written allegations that couldn't be retracted under cross-examination, a system that reduced perjury by 50%. Their legacy lingers in unexpected corners of modern justice. The concept of judicial review, adapted from Ming eunuch panels that screened imperial edicts for constitutional consistency. The tradition of judges wearing robes descended from Byzantine eunuch magistrates' blue silk gowns, chosen to symbolize their separation from worldly concerns. Even jewelry sequestration finds its roots in Tang Dynasty eunuch-judged cases, where deliberating merchants were housed in government offices to prevent tampering. These men transformed courtrooms into laboratories of social engineering, proving that true legal power resides not in the loud pronouncements of lawmakers, but in the quiet interpretations of those who decide what the words actually mean. The rhythmic clatter of looms in a Hangzhou silk workshop wasn't just the sound of industry, it was the pulse of imperial propaganda, each shuttle weaving threads of power as surely as eunuch overseers wove the narrative of dynastic supremacy. These men transformed raw materials into political statements, supervising artisans who crafted everything from ceremonial armor to lacquer, were so exquisite that foreign ambassadors trembled when receiving it as gifts. Take the Ming Dynasty's Imperial Silk Manufacturing Bureau, where eunuchs like Feng Bao didn't merely count bolts of fabric, they enforced draconian quality controls. A single flawed thread in a dragon robe's embroidery could mean the difference between a promotion and a beheading, so they developed an ingenious system. Each artisan sewed their unique mark into the lining, creating the world's first traceable supply chain. Their workshops were laboratories of soft power. In Constantinople's Great Palace, eunuch supervisors orchestrated the production of purple-dyed parchment for imperial decrees, a color so chemically complex its formula was a state secret. By controlling its manufacture, they ensured no rebel could fake royal proclamations. Similarly, Ottoman eunuchs in the Topkapi dagger workshops embedded microscopic calligraphy into jeweled hilts, verses from the Quran so tiny they required magnifying lenses to read. These weren't decorative flourishes, they were authentication codes proving a weapon's royal provenance. The scale of their industrial operations would stagger modern factories. Records from Tang Dynasty, eunuch Zhang Zu's porcelain kilns at Jingdezhen reveal shifts of 3,000 workers producing 40,000 celadon pieces monthly, each inspected under morning light at precise angles to detect hairline cracks. Mughal eunuch supervisors at the Agra gem workshops took this further, training artisans to cut emeralds with facets that would scatter light into green stars when worn by emperors during daylight audiences. Their innovations crossed into military technology. Byzantine eunuch armorers developed Greek fire, spray mechanisms small enough for handheld flamethrowers, while Ming eunuch metallurgists created laminated blades with hard edges and flexible cores centuries before Japanese sword makers discovered the technique. Their most subversive power lay in controlled scarcity. When the Safavid Shah needed to humble a boastful Uzbek Khan, his eunuch workshop master accidentally delayed shipment of the ceremonial carpet promised for the Khan's palace, then presented it months later at a banquet where allied rulers received theirs on time. The message was unmistakable. Even thread and dyes flowed at the emperor's pleasure. Similarly, Qing Dynasty eunuchs restricted access to imperial yellow pigment so completely that when a British envoy requested a sample in 1793, the workshop produced a substitute blend that faded within weeks, preserving the monopoly. The tragic cost of this perfection surfaces in workshop ledgers. Beneath production figures for gilded Buddha statues in Ming records, faint charcoal tallies mark the number of artisans who went blind from mercury-based gilding techniques. Ottoman ivory carvers' contracts included clauses for finger amputations compensated by weight when lathes inevitably caught sleeves. These men weren't just manufacturing luxury, they were curating sacrifice, turning human suffering into the invisible foundation of imperial splendor. Their legacy endures in surprising ways. Modern quality control systems descend from their inspection protocols, and the very concept of limited editions traces back to eunuch workshop quotas. Next time you admire an antique tapestry or jeweled artifact, look closer. The true masterpiece wasn't the object itself, but the invisible system that made its existence possible. The scent of wet fur and distant roars hung heavy in the air as a eunuch keeper adjusted the golden collar around a Bengal tiger's neck, not to restrain the beast, but to showcase the empire's reach. In the sprawling menageries of Constantinople, Delhi, and Beijing, exotic creatures weren't just displays of wealth but living maps of imperial influence, each specimen representing a conquered territory or a cowed rival. The Ming dynasty's imperial tiger stable alone housed 40 big cats, their daily care entrusted to eunuchs who understood something profound. Controlling nature's most dangerous creations mirrored the emperor's dominion over unruly provinces. Managing these collections required skills beyond animal husbandry. When Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Roman II sent Henry Roman III of England 3 leopards in 1235, it was the palace eunuchs who decoded the political message, their spots allegedly forming a pattern matching the Hohenstaufen coat of arms. Similarly, Byzantine eunuch zookeepers noted how visiting Bulgar envoys recoiled at African elephants, later strategically positioning the beasts during subsequent negotiations. These men weren't zookeepers, they were geopolitical analysts in fur-covered disguises, interpreting every growl and feather as diplomatic language. The logistics behind these menageries reveal staggering sophistication. Mughal records describe eunuch-designed cooling systems for Ethiopian lions, underground aqueducts pumping chilled water through marble enclosures during Delhi's scorching summers. Ottoman aviary eunuchs developed an early form of air conditioning by hanging wet reed mats around bird cages, while Tang dynasty handlers created padded silk shoes for giraffes to prevent joint damage on palace flagstones. Their innovations crossed into behavioral science. Ming eunuchs trained elephants to kneel when the emperor passed by associating his distinctive sandalwood scent with rewards, turning biology into pageantry. Perhaps their most cunning trick was weaponizing wonder. When Timur's ambassadors arrived in Ming China, eunuch keepers staged a spontaneous incident where a rhinoceros charged its enclosure bars, stopping exactly 1 pace from the terrified diplomats. The message, even nature's brute force recognized imperial authority. Safavid eunuchs took this further, dyeing snow leopards' fur with saffron to make them appear celestial during royal birthdays, reinforcing the Shah's divine connection. These theatrical flourishes weren't just entertainment. They were psychological operations conducted with claws and talons instead of swords, the darkest chapters unfolded behind the scenes. Byzantine eunuch Menas's diary describes the desperate measures taken to replace a deceased white elephant, including dyeing a gray counterpart with lead-based paint that slowly poisoned it. Ottoman records list grief payments to handlers when prized animals died, suggesting emotional bonds beyond duty. In the end, these menageries became metaphors for empire itself, magnificent, fragile, and ultimately unsustainable. When British forces looted Tipu Sultan's zoo in 1799, they found not just caged beasts, but the last eunuch keeper still dutifully feeding tigers with meat from his own ration, a final act of devotion to creatures that, like their caretakers, were both worshipped and imprisoned by the very system that made them extraordinary. Beneath the flickering light of whale oil lamps, fingers traced fragile bamboo strips bearing Legacies' wisdom, each stroke a defiance of time's erosion. These were the eunuch scribes of the Han dynasty's heavenly archives, men who understood that preserving words was as vital as wielding swords. In Constantinople's Scriptorium Magnum, eunuch librarians like Leo Quirusfax didn't just shelve manuscripts, they performed triage on civilization itself, prioritizing which Greek classics would be copied as barbarians hammered at the Theodosian walls. Their work embodied a sacred paradox. Though barred from fathering children, they became midwives to the birth of future knowledge. The scale of their custodianship was staggering. The Tang dynasty's imperial library required 32 eunuch archivists just to maintain its catalogue, a scroll so vast it needed its own storage chamber. Each entry was checked quarterly for insect damage, with moon phase charts dictating when certain texts could be unrolled to minimize humidity exposure. Byzantine eunuchs developed an early form of deacidification, bathing vellum in walnut oil baths to neutralize corrosive inks. Their meticulousness bordered on obsession. Ottoman head librarian Atuf Efendi's logs noted not just a manuscript's condition, but the exact shelf position where sunlight would fade its gilding over decades. Their true genius emerged during crises. When Mongol flames threatened Baghdad's House of Wisdom in 1258, eunuch librarian Ibn al-Athir smuggled out Ptolemy's Almagest by sewing its pages into his robe lining, an act that preserved celestial mathematics for Renaissance astronomers. Similarly, Ming eunuch Yang Rong rescued Confucian classics during the Tumu crisis by hiding them in false-bottomed grain wagons, later recompiling damaged texts using a photographic memory honed through years of recitation drills. These weren't mere preservationists, they were cultural firefighters racing against time's inferno. Beyond physical protection, they shaped intellectual legacies. The Vatican's eunuch librarians during the Avignon papacy developed the first systematic censorship guidelines, not to suppress knowledge but to safeguard it, flagging dangerous astrological texts for restricted study rather than destruction. In Mughal India, harem eunuchs curated miniature painting manuals specifically for royal women's education, ensuring artistic traditions thrived behind purdah walls. Their most subversive act was selective translation. Byzantine eunuch scholars lost certain Greek medical texts in Arabic until Latin Europe matured enough to grasp their revolutionary anatomy lessons without branding them heresy. The fragility they guarded mirrors their own historical erasure. Today, when scholars pore over Song dynasty agricultural treatises or Umayyad poetry anthologies, they're handling objects that pass through eunuch fingers, yet those custodians rarely merit footnotes. The Vatican's oldest Bible restoration tools still bear grooves matching the hand spans of long-dead eunuch conservators, anonymous as the marginalia they saved from oblivion. Perhaps this was their ultimate lesson, that true stewardship requires disappearing into the work, leaving knowledge brighter than one's own shadow. In the quiet glow of reading lamps centuries later, their legacy endures not in monuments bearing their names, but in the very act of our remembering. The rhythmic clang of chisels shaping stone echoed through the valleys of the Roman countryside, where teams of laborers worked under the watchful eyes of an unlikely supervisor, a eunuch engineer marking precise angles on a wax tablet. While emperors took credit for grand aqueducts and highways, it was often these overlooked administrators who ensured that ambitious blueprints became functional realities. The Claudia Aqueduct, stretching 54 miles into Rome with gravitational precision, didn't just happen because of imperial decrees. It required the meticulous oversight of eunuchs like Aulus Plautius, who coordinated thousands of workers while navigating supply chain disruptions and land disputes. Their genius lay in translating imperial vanity into public utility, turning marble models in palace courtyards into roads that connected farmers to markets and aqueducts that fed entire cities. What made eunuchs particularly effective as infrastructure overseers? Their lack of personal landholdings removed conflicts of interest that plagued aristocratic engineers. When the Tang dynasty needed to expand the Grand Canal, eunuch Liu Yan could reroute it through politically sensitive regions without favoring his own estates, a neutrality that allowed him to prioritize the empire's logistical needs over local bribes. Byzantine records reveal similar advantages. eunuch supervisors of the Via Egnatia roadway systematically rejected shortcuts proposed by wealthy landowners, insisting on geometrically straight paths that reduced travel time for military dispatches. This impartiality extended to labor management. Ottoman eunuch overseers on sultanate's water systems pioneered fair wage policies, calculating pay based on daily productivity rather than social status, which kept construction moving during droughts when workers were scarce. Their engineering solutions reveal startling innovation. Faced with unstable soil beneath Constantinople's Valens aqueduct, eunuch architect Anthemius devised hollow piers filled with volcanic pumice, an ancient version of shock absorption that saved the structure during earthquakes. In China, eunuch hydrologists of the Yuan dynasty created adjustable sluice gates along the Yellow River, using early calculus to predict seasonal flow changes. These weren't just technical feats, they were acts of political theater. When Ming eunuch Yuan rebuilt Beijing's streets after a Mongol invasion, he intentionally made main avenues slightly too narrow for rebel cavalry formations, while ensuring imperial messengers had hidden alley shortcuts urban planning as defensive strategy. The true measure of their impact emerges in the details. Roman tax records show towns near eunuch-supervised roads prospered 30% faster than others, thanks to consistent maintenance that kept trade flowing. A Sassanid Persian courier system overseen by eunuchs could relay messages 1,500 miles in 7 days, a speed unmatched until the 19th century. Their legacy lingers in modern infrastructure. The cambered design of today's highways descends from Byzantine eunuch road engineers who understood curved surfaces shed rainwater better. Next time you drink from a public fountain or cross a well-graded bridge, remember, these everyday conveniences were often perfected by men history forgot, whose bodies were broken so civilizations could be built. When a dying emperor's last breath left the question of succession hanging like an unsheathed sword, it was often a eunuch's whisper that determined whether the empire would fracture or endure. These men, barred from claiming power for themselves, became the ultimate neutral arbiters in the bloodiest game of all dynastic survival. Take the Tang dynasty's crisis of 705, when Empress Wu Zetian's death sparked a vicious struggle between her sons. The court eunuch Gao Lishi didn't just deliver messages between the warring princes, he engineered their reconciliation by staging a midnight meeting in the ancestral temple, where the flickering shadows of their forebears' tablets shamed them into compromise. His genius lay in understanding that succession wasn't about choosing the strongest heir, but preserving the illusion of continuity that kept provincial governors loyal and peasant revolts at bay. What gave eunuchs this unique mediating power? Their entire existence embodied the paradox of influence without ambition. While generals and ministers backed claimants to secure their own futures, a eunuch's legacy couldn't extend beyond his lifetime. Byzantine chronicles describe how 11th century eunuch Nicephorites diffused a four-way succession crisis by taking all contenders on a tour of the imperial treasury, not to showcase wealth, but to point out the meticulous inventory logs kept by generations of eunuch stewards. "The empire is this," he reportedly said, tapping the ledger, "not whoever sits the throne." His message was clear: civil war would burn the records that made rule possible. The Ottomans institutionalized this role through the Kapi Agassi, the chief white eunuch whose approval legitimized new sultans. When teenage maimed Roman III ascended in 1595, it was the Kapi Agassi who prevented immediate fratricide by secretly spiriting the prince's 19 brothers to Topkapi's inner courtyards, not to kill them, as tradition demanded, but to hold them as bargaining chips against rebellious governors. This macabre restraint saved the empire from fragmenting during its war with Habsburgs. Similarly, Mughal eunuch Itibar Khan averted disaster after Akbar's death by leaking fake assassination plots that forced rival heirs into temporary alliance, proving that sometimes the threat of chaos could unite better than any promise of order. Their mediation tactics reveal psychological brilliance. Ming eunuch Feng Bao famously resolved a 3-year succession stalemate by having the rival prince's infant sons raised together in the palace nursery, creating bonds that outweighed later political rivalries. In Constantinople, eunuch chamberlains exploited religious theater, staging miraculous icons that wept before the most suitable candidate. The Safavid eunuch Alavadi Khan took a darker approach. He had rival Shahzadas sign their compromise agreement using ink mixed with their own blood, a visceral reminder that the dynasty's survival mattered more than individual lives. The ultimate testament to their success lies in what didn't happen. For every Roman empire that collapsed from succession wars, there were dozens of crises eunuchs quietly diffused. When Abbasid Caliph Al-Ma'mun marched on Baghdad to depose his brother Al-Amin, it was the palace eunuchs who brokered a power-sharing arrangement that prevented total collapse, a model later emulated by Venetian mediators during Italy's wars. Their legacy lingers in modern transitions of power. The British monarchy's London Bridge Protocol for royal succession owes its smoothness to techniques adapted from Qing Dynasty eunuch playbooks. These men understood that bloodlines meant nothing if the institutions around them crumbled, and sometimes the most powerful person in the room was the one who couldn't pass anything on. The clink of freshly struck coins hitting the counting table wasn't just the sound of commerce, it was the heartbeat of empire, each piece a tiny messenger of imperial authority. And the hands overseeing their creation, often those of eunuchs, men who understood that controlling money meant controlling the very lifeblood of kingdoms. In Constantinople's underground mint, eunuch supervisors like Narses the Younger didn't just tally gold solidi, they orchestrated economic policy through deliberate debasement, adjusting silver content to fund Justinian's wars without triggering inflation overnight. Their workshops were fortresses within fortresses. The Ming dynasty's coin mint near Nanjing employed 300 eunuch guards just to prevent workers from smuggling out metal shavings in their clothing seams. What made eunuchs ideal mint masters? Their detachment from dynastic ambitions allowed emperors to trust them with fiscal secrets that would tempt noble treasurers. When Abbasid Caliph Al-Ma'mun needed to flood Baghdad's markets with new dirhams to break a silver shortage, he turned to his chief eunuch Yahya, who devised a revolutionary solution, stamping coins with expiration dates to ensure rapid circulation rather than hoarding. Similarly, Byzantine eunuch mint supervisors pioneered anti-counterfeiting techniques, embedding microscopic crosses in coin designs that only became visible under candlelight at specific angles. Their innovations weren't just about preventing fraud, they were psychological tools to reinforce faith in imperial currency. The scale of their operations would dwarf modern mints. Tang Dynasty records reveal eunuch-run facilities producing 6 million copper coins daily during economic booms, with water-powered trip hammers pounding blanks 24 hours a day. Ottoman eunuch mint directors took efficiency further, creating interchangeable die sets that allowed swift currency redesigns when sultans ascended, a monetary rebranding accomplished in weeks rather than months. These weren't factories, they were economic command centers where metal ratios were weapons as potent as armies. When the Mongols besieged Kiev, it was the Byzantine eunuch mint supervisor Theodore who saved the city, not with soldiers, but by flooding the steppe with deliberately debased coins that collapsed the invaders' war chest overnight. Their most cunning moves involved perception management. Mughal eunuch minters under Akbar issued heavier gold mohurs during harvest seasons, creating the illusion of prosperity that encouraged tax compliance. Safavid eunuchs went further, alloying silver coins with rose gold during plagues so the faint pink hue would subliminally associate currency with health, an early form of monetary psychology. Even failures became lessons. When Ming eunuch Liu Jin's experimental paper notes triggered hyperinflation in 1508, his meticulous records of the disaster later helped king economists stabilize their own currency reforms. The true measure of their power surfaces in rebellion's aftermath. After crushing the An Lushan revolt, Tang eunuch mint masters didn't just restore the coinage, they recast every recovered weapon into coins stamped with the rebellion's defeat date, turning money into living propaganda. Similarly, when the Ottomans reclaimed Budapest in 1686, Chief White Eunuch Yusuf Agha melted captured church bells into axe coins bearing the phrase, "Metals change, God remains," a theological twist on economic dominance. Their legacy endures in every modern central bank's playbook. The concept of monetary velocity, anti-counterfeiting watermarks, even the psychological impact of currency, redesigns all trace back to these overlooked architects of fiscal stability. Next time you glance at a coin's edge reading or a bill's holographic strip, remember, you're holding echoes of a system perfected by men who proved that real power isn't just about making money, but making money mean something. A golden reliquary sealed with the emperor's personal cipher wasn't merely stored. It was entrusted to hands believed to exist between worlds. Eunuchs like the Tang dynasty's Lai Fuguo didn't just guard sacred objects. They became living conduits between the earthly and the divine, their altered bodies seen as ritually purified vessels worthy of touching what others could only venerate from afar. When the tooth relic of Buddha arrived in Chang'an in 819, it was the palace eunuchs who designed its procession route to align with constellations, turning a simple transfer into a celestial event that left thousands of witnesses prostrate in the streets. Their guardianship wasn't about physical security, it was about maintaining the fragile membrane between the sacred and the profane. What set eunuchs apart as relic-keepers was their perceived neutrality in spiritual hierarchies. Unlike monks or priests who might use sacred objects to bolster their own religious authority, a eunuch's lack of descendants removed suspicion of dynastic ambition. Byzantine emperors entrusted eunuchs like Constantine the Paphlagonian with fragments of the true cross precisely because they couldn't father sons who might later claim divine connections. In Timur's Samarkand, the Quran of Uthman, believed stained with the third caliph's blood, was kept in a eunuch-staffed shrine where visitors noted how the keeper's voices unconsciously shifted to whispers when handling the text, as if the pages themselves demanded reverence. Their methods of protection bordered on mystical. Ming Dynasty eunuchs overseeing the imperial jade seals developed a ritual where 3 keepers had to simultaneously turn keys from different directions to open the relic vault, an early form of multi-factor authentication. Ottoman harem eunuchs guarding the Prophet's mantle in Istanbul's sacred trust chamber wore gloves woven from silk harvested only during the holiest nights of Ramadan. Even theft prevention took on spiritual dimensions. When Sassanid eunuch Varis transported the legendary crown of Kavad across war-torn Persia, he sewed it into his own flesh beneath a bandage, knowing robbers would recoil from violating a living body. The relics they guarded often transformed them in return. Byzantine accounts describe eunuch keepers of St. Stephen's bones developing stigmata-like marks after years of handling the martyr's ossuary. Mughal records tell of a eunuch guardian of Akbar's alleged hair relic who could allegedly predict droughts by the strand's changing texture. Whether these phenomena were divine or psychological mattered less than their effect. Each occurrence reinforced the eunuch's sacred aura, making their continued stewardship seem cosmically ordained. Perhaps their most profound legacy was in democratizing access to the divine. While nobles and clergy often monopolized relic veneration, eunuch keepers in Ming China instituted public display days where peasants could view the emperor's sacred jade through precisely measured viewing tubes close enough to inspire awe, but never enough to threaten the object's mystique. Similarly, Ottoman eunuch custodians of the Black Stones fragment in Edirne developed a ticket system allowing pilgrims timed access, preventing elite monopolization. In an age where the sacred was often weaponized as a tool of control, these men, despite being instruments of imperial power, unwittingly became bridges between the celestial and the common, proving that even in the most hierarchical systems, holiness has a way of slipping its leash. The pounding of hooves along the imperial post road wasn't just the sound of speed, it was the rhythm of governance itself, each galloping mare carrying scrolls that could alter the fate of provinces. Eunuch postal supervisors like the Tang dynasty's Yukaon didn't merely oversee message delivery. They orchestrated an intelligence network so precise that weather reports from distant garrisons reached the emperor's desk before local officials even felt the storm's first raindrops. Their relay stations, spaced every 15 miles with fresh horses and riders, formed the ancient world's internet, a web of information pulsing across empires at speeds that wouldn't be surpassed until the steam age. What transformed these men into masters of imperial communication? Their unique position allowed them to bypass traditional bureaucratic gridlock. While provincial governors might delay unfavorable reports or military commanders exaggerate victories, eunuch postal inspectors moved outside normal chains of command. Byzantine records describe how the cursus publicus, the empire's postal system, employed eunuch auditors who carried seals allowing them to open and reseal any message pouch without leaving traces. This wasn't just about efficiency, it was about creating parallel channels of truth that emperors could trust when official reports grew suspiciously optimistic. The logistical innovations they introduced still astonish. Ottoman Ulak courier stations under eunuch supervision developed a color-coded flag system, red for military alerts that triggered automatic horse changes without dismounting, green for routine dispatches, black for plague warnings that quarantined entire routes. Ming Dynasty eunuchs took cryptography further, embedding message authentication in the seams of seemingly ordinary merchant passes. Only those who knew to measure the stitching intervals could decode the real intelligence hidden in plain sight. These weren't mailmen, they were the original data scientists turning dirt roads into information superhighways. Their greatest power lay in controlling the flow of news itself. When Mongol forces breached the Great Wall in 1449, it was the eunuch postal director Wang Zhen who delayed the alert's arrival just long enough for the Zhengtong emperor to walk into an ambush at Tumu Fortress, a catastrophic communication error that historians now suspect was deliberate political sabotage. Conversely, Byzantine eunuch postal masters saved Constantinople during the Arab sieges by maintaining secret pigeon routes that brought grain shipments from Crimea when all other channels failed. The difference between empire and ashes often came down to which side's eunuchs better manipulated the arteries of information. The echoes of their systems surround us still. Modern express shipping's hub and spoke model, adapted from Yuan dynasty eunuch postal maps, the concept of priority mail descended from Mogul dak runners who carried urgent scrolls in mouth-guarded tubes to prevent swallowing even if captured. These men understood what modern leaders often forget, that the message isn't just the medium, it's the lifeblood of power itself, and whoever controls its pulse holds the real reins of empire. The towering granaries of Loyang stood as silent sentinels against starvation, their vaulted ceilings holding not just grain, but the fragile trust between emperors and millions of hungry subjects. Within these monumental storehouses, eunuch overseers like the Tang dynasty's Zhao Cheng moved with methodical precision, weighing each bushel against ledgers that could mean the difference between order and chaos. Their fingers, often stained with ink from tallying harvests, wielded more life or death power than any general's sword. A single miscalculation in distribution ratios could spark riots that toppled dynasties. This humanitarian role shattered the stereotype of eunuchs as mere political schemers. In Byzantium, eunuch grain controllers developed revolutionary preservation techniques, layering wheat with crushed limestone to repel insects and rotating stocks based on lunar cycles to minimize spoilage. Their meticulous records from the 7th century reveal something astonishing. By calculating exact caloric needs per province, they maintained 3 years' worth of surplus, an ancient equivalent of modern food security buffers. When drought struck Anatolia in 694, it wasn't the emperor's prayers but his eunuch granary masters pre-positioned stockpiles along the Sangarius River that saved 50,000 from starvation. The logistics behind these operations rivaled modern supply chains. Ming Dynasty eunuchs created color-coded grain tickets: red for military reserves, yellow for civil distributions, green for famine relief, with watermarked patterns too complex for counterfeiters to replicate. Ottoman records describe the chief black eunuch supervising the harem grain administration, personally tasting random samples from each shipment, not just checking for mold but assessing quality grades that determined whether wheat went to palace kitchens or provincial soup kitchens. Their systems were so precise that Qing Dynasty granary eunuchs could predict shortages 6 months in advance by tracking rainfall patterns against historical yield data. Yet this life-saving work carried brutal realities. During the Great North China Famine of 1876, eunuch overseers like Lai Lining faced impossible choices. Rationing meager supplies meant watching children starve, while over-distribution risked collapse of the entire system. Survivor accounts describe granary eunuchs who secretly diverted imperial rice to orphanages, then publicly accepted floggings for shortages they'd engineered to save lives. The psychological toll surfaces in their poetry. One anonymous Song Dynasty granary keeper wrote of counting grains until "my tears become the missing measure." Their innovations still influence global food policy. The Roman Annona system's tiered distribution model, pioneered by eunuch administrators, inspired modern food bank networks. Byzantine grain dole calculations based on family size reappear in 21st century aid formulas. Even the concept of strategic grain reserves traces back to eunuch-managed storehouses along the Silk Road that stabilized prices across continents. These men proved that true power wasn't just about controlling armies or treasuries. Sometimes, the mightiest force in empire was knowing exactly where to place a single sack of rice. The gleam of a crown in candlelight wasn't just a reflection. It was the visible heartbeat of empire, and the hands that polished that gold to perfection understood its power better than anyone. Eunuchs entrusted with imperial regalia didn't merely dust scepters or air out coronation robes. They performed alchemy, transforming precious metals and jewels into living embodiments of dynastic legitimacy. In the Forbidden City's innermost vaults, eunuch keepers like Ming Dynasty's Liu Ruoyu followed rituals so precise that each fold in the emperor's dragon robe had to align with astrological charts before storage. Their work was a sacred science, blending textile care with statecraft. A single misplaced thread in the 9-dragon embroidery could unravel the carefully woven illusion of celestial mandate. What made these men the ultimate guardians of royal symbols? Their daily intimacy with objects others only glimpsed during ceremonies gave them unique insight into the theater of power. Byzantine eunuch vesharios supervised teams that spent weeks preparing the emperor's purple chlamys for Easter processions, not just cleaning the silk. but ensuring its dyed hue matched exactly the shade worn by Constantine centuries earlier. Ottoman records reveal chief white eunuchs rehearsing with the sword of Osman weeks before accession ceremonies, adjusting their grip to make the ancient blade appear weightless when the new sultan first held it. These weren't janitors, they were stage directors for the most important performance of all, the illusion of eternal, unchanging authority. The logistics behind their stewardship reveal astonishing sophistication. Mughal eunuch keepers developed a climate control system for the peacock throne using hollow gold panels filled with rosewater that slowly evaporated to regulate humidity. In Constantinople, the eunuch secularios responsible for imperial crowns created a wax impression system. Each gem's exact position was recorded in beeswax molds so any theft would be immediately apparent. Their methods bordered on obsessive. Tang dynasty regalia eunuchs used camel hair brushes to clean jade ornaments because the fibers wouldn't scratch even under magnification, while Safavid handlers stored ceremonial armor with bags of crushed pomegranate rinds to prevent tarnishing. Yet their true genius lay in psychological manipulation. When the Kangxi emperor's coronation robe needed repairs after a moth infestation, eunuch tailors didn't just replace the damaged sections, they rewove the entire silk backing so the new threads would age at the same rate as the original fabric, maintaining the illusion of timeless perfection. Similarly, Byzantine eunuchs would discreetly add lead weights to an aging emperor's crown before public appearances, making him unconsciously stand straighter under its familiar heft, projecting vigor even as his body failed. These subtle adjustments weren't deceit but devotion to the idea of empire as something transcendent beyond any single ruler's mortality. The darker side of their duty emerged during succession crises. Ming eunuch Wang Zhen famously hid the imperial seal during a coup attempt, sewing it into his own robe lining for 3 months until the rightful heir could be installed. Ottoman harem eunuchs developed a secret protocol for rapidly aging new sultans' ceremonial garb, rubbing hems with tea stains and gently fraying embroidery to make hastily assembled regalia appear venerable. Their most heartbreaking task came after dynasties fell. King Eunuch Zhang Dihui's diary describes wrapping the last emperor's robes in uncut silk before the Republican takeover, preserving not just the garments but the precise folds they'd been worn in, as if waiting for a resurrection that would never come. Their legacy endures in unexpected ways. Modern museum conservation techniques for royal artifacts descend directly from eunuch preservation methods. The British crown jewels velvet cushions are still rotated using a schedule adapted from Mughal protocols. The concept of handling objects with white gloves originated with Byzantine eunuchs who noticed bare fingers left acidic traces on gemstones. More profoundly, these guardians understood what modern leaders often forget: that symbols don't just represent power, they actively generate it through meticulous care and calculated display. In the end, the true magic of crowns and scepters lay not in their gemstones or gold, but in the reverent hands that kept them ready to perform their ancient alchemy, transforming mortal rulers into something that felt, if only for a moment, divine. The delicate plucking of a peeper's strings in the Tang dynasty's pear garden wasn't just music, it was a carefully orchestrated lesson in imperial loyalty. Eunuch entertainment supervisors like Lai Guinyan didn't merely organize performances, they weaponized leisure, turning song and dance into tools of political conditioning. Every melody carried hidden meanings. Compositions praising ancient virtuous rulers subtly critiqued current emperors' excesses, while acrobats tumbling in flawless formation embodied the discipline expected of court officials. The jesters who seemed to improvise bawdy jokes, their routines were rehearsed for weeks under eunuch scrutiny, ensuring laughter never edged into sedition. Controlling court amusement required genius-level social engineering. Ming Dynasty eunuch Wei Zhongxian maintained a troupe of child performers trained to mimic provincial accents perfectly. Their satirical skits about corrupt local officials gave the emperor actionable intelligence disguised as comedy. Byzantine chronicles describe eunuch entertainment masters staging plays where actors unknowingly reenacted recent military defeats, allowing emperors to gauge courtiers' reactions to sensitive news. Even the seating arrangements at Ottoman poetry recitals were tactical. Chief harem eunuchs placed rival viziers beside each other to observe whose compliments sounded strained when a rival's protege recited verse. Their most cunning trick was addiction by curation. Safavid eunuchs introduced chess tournaments with prizes just valuable enough to hook Persian nobles into wasting weeks strategizing over boards instead of plots. Mughal records reveal eunuch music supervisors gradually increasing the tempo of evening ragas during succession crises, manipulating the court's collective pulse toward calmness. These weren't party planners, they were psychological architects who understood that the best way to control powerful people was to make them crave the distractions they orchestrated. The dark side of this control emerged in punishment masquerading as amusement. When Byzantine Emperor Basil Roman II wanted to humiliate a rebellious general, his eunuch entertainment director staged a banquet where servants reenacted the man's defeat, using roasted songbirds as stand-ins for his shattered troops. Tang Dynasty eunuchs forced disgraced scholars to perform drunken monkey dances at festivals, their academic robes swapped for jingling bells. Yet even these cruelties served calculated ends. The same nobles who laughed at their peers' degradation knew they might be next, ensuring self-censorship long after the music faded. Their legacy hides in plain sight today. The concept of court jesters speaking truth to power was largely a eunuch-manufactured myth. Those apparent improvised jabs were as scripted as modern late-night monologues. The lavish intermissions at Verdi operas, direct descendants of Ottoman eunuch-designed palace entertainment breaks, meant to allow whispered negotiations during applause. These masters of merriment proved that true influence often lies not in controlling what people must do, but what they choose to enjoy, and that sometimes the most effective prison walls are woven from silk strings and laughter. In the hushed hours between midnight and dawn, when even the most powerful rulers faced their private demons, it was often a eunuch's voice that broke the silence, not with flattery, but with the dangerous gift of unvarnished truth. Unlike ministers who angled for promotions or generals hungry for glory, these men had no dynasty to build, no heirs to advance. That made them the rarest of creatures in any royal court. Someone who could look an emperor in the eye and say, "This is a mistake," without fearing the consequences. When Tang Dynasty ruler Xuanzong hesitated between war and diplomacy with the Tibetans, it wasn't his decorated generals but elderly eunuch Gao Lianxi who settled the debate with 3 devastating words: "Your father chose patience." This role as ultimate confidant wasn't about sycophancy, it was about survival. Byzantine Emperor Constantine Roman VII eunuch Chamberlain Basil Lecapenus famously kept a list called "What Others Won't Tell You," documenting everything from corrupt tax collectors to which concubines were secretly mocking the ruler's poetry. His nightly briefings became so essential that the emperor had a special silver bell crafted just to summon him, its chime meaning, "Speak freely." The Ottomans institutionalized this trust in the Sultan's Musahib companion eunuchs, who underwent years of psychological training to master when to offer advice and when to simply listen. Their most valuable skill, distinguishing between a ruler's passing frustrations and genuine cries for guidance. The paradox of their influence lay in its invisibility. Ming Dynasty eunuch Wang Zhen left no written policies, yet his whispered advice during the Zhengtong Emperor's childhood shaped decades of tax reforms. We know of his impact only through the accounts of frustrated ministers who complained their petitions were ignored until the inner voice spoke. Similarly, Mughal Emperor Akbar's legendary wisdom owed much to his illiterate eunuch advisor Birbal, whose folk parables about farmers and foxes conveyed political lessons no textbook could match. The best advisors didn't just give answers, they helped rulers hear their own conscience. Yet this intimacy carried lethal risks. When Byzantine Emperor Justinian faced the Nika riots, his eunuch chamberlain Narses didn't just counsel defiance, he personally delivered bags of gold to the hippodrome's rival factions, turning their rage against each other. The gamble saved the empire but marked Narses forever as the man who bought blood with coins. For every success story, there were eunuchs like Tang Dynasty's Yu Keon, whose brutal honesty about an empress's fading beauty earned him years of exile. Their stories reveal a haunting truth. The closer a eunuch stood to the throne's ear, the more certain his eventual fall. The ultimate testament to their advisory role lies in how rulers mourned them. When Ottoman Sultan Suleiman's beloved eunuch named Agha died, the conqueror of Vienna composed an elegy comparing their conversations to a blind man's staff. Qianlong Emperor's tribute to his dying confidant Lai Yu included a shocking breach of protocol, the monarch personally spoon-feeding him medicine. These weren't just master-servant relationships. They were the closest thing to friendship possible in gilded cages where everyone else wanted something. In the end, the silent tears shed over eunuch advisors' biers spoke louder than any state funeral, revealing the human cost of power and the irreplaceable value of someone who remembers you existed before the crown. From harem guardians to fleet commanders, eunuchs defied every expectation, bending the rigid structures of power to their will while operating in a world that pretended not to see them. Their legacy isn't just a collection of historical footnotes, it's a masterclass in how influence works when traditional paths are barred. Think of Narses outmaneuvering kings on the battlefield despite never wielding a sword himself, or Zheng He navigating diplomatic storms as smoothly as his treasure ships rode ocean currents. These men took the very traits society used to marginalize them, their lack of descendants, their outsider status, and forged them into weapons sharper than any blade in an emperor's armory. What makes their stories so revolutionary isn't just what they achieved, but how they redefined the rules of the game. While nobles fought for titles and generals chased glory, eunuchs played the long con, accumulating not land or heirs but something far more enduring: institutional knowledge. The Ming Dynasty's palace eunuchs didn't just serve emperors, they became living archives, remembering where every skeleton was buried because they'd often been the ones to inter them. Byzantine eunuch administrators could recite tax codes from 3 reigns back, while Ottoman harem guardians tracked family alliances across generations. In a world before databases, their minds were the cloud storage of empire. This journey through their 31 roles reveals a startling pattern. The most effective power brokers often thrive in the spaces others overlook. Eunuchs turned the harem's seclusion into an intelligence hub, transformed ceremonial duties into psychological operations, and converted their financial oversight into economic warfare. Their greatest weapon wasn't physical strength or noble birth, it was situational fluency, the ability to read a room, a ledger, or a battlefield with equal precision. When the Sassanid king needed to humble a rebellious general, he didn't send soldiers, he dispatched a eunuch treasurer to freeze the man's accounts. Real power, it turns out, often lies in the quietest hands. As we close this chapter, here's the provocative thought they leave us with. How much of history's real momentum comes not from the figures in the spotlight, but from those operating just outside its glow? The scribes who edited chronicles, the chamberlains who controlled access, the guardians who decided which artifacts survived wars and which accidentally burned, these were the stealth architects of civilization. Their legacy whispers to us through the cracks in official records, in the faint marginalia of manuscripts, in the stubborn survival of traditions that outlived the empires they served. If this exploration has shifted how you see the past or the hidden mechanics of power today, let that curiosity lead you forward. History's shadows are deeper than we imagine, and every uncovered story changes the mosaic. Share which of these 31 roles surprised you most, or which empire's eunuchs you'd want to explore next. The conversation doesn't end here, it's just begun. And who knows, the next time you read about a royal decree or a battlefield victory, you might find yourself wondering whose unseen hand really guided that outcome. The answers, like the best histories, are waiting where the light hasn't quite reached